Hey there, true crime fans. Welcome back to For Criming Out Loud and our bedtime series called Crime Me to Sleep. We've been reading While Idaho Slept, and this is the 15th episode. So if you are new here, please make sure you subscribe and go back into the playlists and start the book from the very beginning. Let's get into episode 15 of While Idaho Slept. Chapter 59. Michael and Marianne Koberger had had a rough go of things over the years. In their 2010 bankruptcy documents, they listed their savings account as holding only $49.77, their checking account with $398, their cash on hand as only $65, and a credit card debt of more than $57,000 across 15 cards. Their income had hardly been enough to raise 3 kids without struggling, and yet the Kobergers had somehow managed, and their children had not gone without a roof over their heads. The oldest daughter, Amanda, had dabbled with acting in her 20s. She landed at least one role in a slasher film, but eventually both she and her younger sister Melissa had become mental health therapists. And Brian, of course, had seemed to turn his life around, studiously pursuing his PhD. Things had seemingly fallen into place for the Koberger parents, and yet now their lives had been upended again by the horrific accusations against their son. Brian was being accused of committing a quadruple homicide with a large blade knife, of all things, and of being a slasher, like in the movie his sister had been associated with. And the method used in the murders was especially disturbing and pointed to a deeper level of brokenness. Anytime somebody commits a murder or assault by choking, stabbing, or making bodily contact, it always speaks to a level of rage, forensic psychologist Nafalti Beryl told a reporter for Seeker, while dissecting a Pittsburgh mass attack that involved a 16-year-old slashing 19 of his fellow high school students. When you are stabbing someone, it's close and in your face. The experience is more visceral and more graphic, more provocative. It speaks to emotionality, whether rage or paranoia. Brian Koberger, who may have been filled with such rage, specifically toward women, had grown up in a home with 3 of them. In the turmoil following Koberger's arrest, the family finances were apparently taking another hit. According to a News Nation report, Amanda and Melissa had lost their jobs because of their association with their now infamous brother, even though he had yet to go to trial for his alleged crimes. And Michael and Marianne's home was reportedly on the edge of foreclosure. Carrie Rawson, the BTK killer's daughter, experienced similar financial and social hardships after her father was arrested. Most of her immediate family members were unable to work for several months because of stress or ostracization. I am so sorry, you guys. Ostracization in the workplace. Her uncle, the BTK's brother, had a good job at Boeing, but was forced into early retirement. And the BTK's mother, Rawson's grandmother, had literally been repeatedly falling from the stress of the media constantly following her. She had been moved to a nursing home and forced to take a different last name for her safety. The only way to understand what the Kobergers might be going through, Rawson told News Nation, was to see them as crime victims themselves. You have to start from that place, she said. But the financial and social stress wasn't the only collateral damage the Kobergers might have been facing. By the month of May, Michael and Marianne were subpoenaed to testify before a Monroe County, Pennsylvania investigative grand jury in relation to the disappearance and murder of a woman in a nearby town just months before their son had moved to Pullman. It had been 1 year since 45-year-old Dana Smithers was last seen leaving her neighbor's house on foot at approximately 11 p.m. in the borough of Stroudsburg, 40 minutes away from the Koberger home, on May 28, 2022. Her phone, purse, car keys, and medications were found in her residence a few houses down, leading investigators to surmise that Smithers had made it home before meeting with probable violence. Nobody really knew what happened to her, though, until April 27th of the following year, while Brian Koberger was in jail on suspicion of committing the King Road homicides. Decomposed human remains were found in a wooded area of Stroudsburg and positively identified as belonging to Smithers. Almost immediately after Koberger's parents were subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury, the public had questions. Mainly, why had they been brought in? It seemed logical to assume that Brian Koberger was suspected of being involved in Dana Smithers' murder, and that Michael and Mary Ann were perhaps his alibi, or lack thereof. But the Stroud Area Regional Police Department speedily issued a formal statement contradicting any ideas about Brian Koberger's association with the Smithers murder. The SARPD has no evidence that Dana Smithers' disappearance is in any way tied to Idaho murder suspect Brian Koberger, read the official press release from Jennifer Lyon, Chief of Police. More speculation arose after that. Since there was no alleged connection, perhaps Koberger's parents had been compelled to testify as a mere ruse to confirm Brian's alibi, or something similar, and in doing so, perhaps provide other useful information about their son during the course of the proceedings. Pennsylvania law allowed otherwise sealed grand jury testimony to be shared between police departments. In this case, the Moscow PD could review Michael and Mary Ann's sealed testimony months ahead of Brian Koberger's trial. Koberger's parents hired an attorney who had unsuccessfully attempted to quash the Monroe County subpoena, an additional hit to their budget. The financial burden of visiting their son in the Latah County Jail, all the way across the country in Idaho, must have seemed out of the question. They had reportedly not seen him since his arrest, but had talked to him on the phone. He knows absolutely no one, Mary Ann had said on Reddit in the days before Koberger loaded his belongings and fueled up on gas to start his PhD program. And we have no family there. I worry about him being lonely. Now, for Mary Ann or Michael to see their son again in the near future seemed unlikely. Chapter 60. Another grand jury had recently convened in Idaho. Its purpose was to determine whether or not sufficient evidence existed to indict, meaning officially charge, Brian Koberger with the King Road homicides and bring him to trial. This was confusing to some followers of the case on social media, since Koberger had already languished in jail under the presumption of his likely guilt, an ironic contrast to the presumption of innocence the accused are judicially afforded. The grand jury elected to indict, and Koberger was soon brought to an arraignment, where by law he was to either plead guilty, not guilty, or stand silent, in which case the judge would enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. Sometimes a defendant would stand silent in rebellion against their attorney or the courts, other times as a tactic, such as ensuring he would not be on the record as saying not guilty, which might cause undue hostility from jurors who might later decide his fate. An inquisitive public had not seen Kohberger since his initial court appearances over 4 months ago. Now, he wore the same prisoner garb over what appeared to be a concealed bulletproof vest filling out his torso. Kohberger looked stern, his skin the pale color of someone kept exclusively indoors for several months. His shackled feet shuffled as he entered the courtroom. He sat heavily beside Ann Taylor, his primary public defender, and did not look behind him. If he had, he would have seen what might have been dozens of family members of the victims. Steve and Christy Gonzalez were there, along with their daughter Olivia and her newborn baby. Olivia sat in the gallery just feet from Kohberger and gently bounced her baby in a harness across her chest. Steve Gonzalez had his eyes locked on Kohberger, glaring. Kohberger was again read the charges that he faced, including the 4 counts of premeditated homicide, along with 1 additional charge of burglary. Kohberger nodded his head in understanding as the case's new judge, a University of Idaho Law School graduate, John C. Judge, read the charges against him. With each question asked of him, Kohberger leaned forward and spoke firmly into the microphone at his table. "Yes, I do," he said when asked if he understood his rights. "No," he said rigidly when asked if he had any questions. He clenched his jaw, glanced briefly at his attorney. Judge Judge spoke in a somber monotone. "If you are found guilty or plead guilty on each charge, you could be facing 10 years in prison, followed by 4 consecutive life sentences, or the death penalty." When it was time for Kohberger's plea to be entered, Ann Taylor stood from her seat. "Your Honor, we will be standing silent," she said. The BTK killer, whom Kohberger had studied at DeSales, had initially done the same. The judge entered not guilty pleas on Kohberger's behalf. A trial was set for October 2nd, and Kohberger was walked out of the courtroom by armed sheriff's deputies. Despite the sweeping gag order in place to prevent the families of the victims from talking about the case to the media, Gonzalez spoke with a reporter after the arraignment. He had a new goatee and looked tougher somehow than he had a few months earlier. He said that his primary emotion in the courtroom had been rage. Then he had shifted to a more productive mindset, he said, reminding himself to pay better attention to the proceedings, to take notes, to memorize, to understand, not just suffer through the anger he'd felt building up. His family needed him to be more strategic than that. "Justice doesn't fall out of the sky," he said. "Sometimes you gotta earn it." Then he added, speaking about his daughter and her friends, "We are looking for somebody to pay the price for what he did to them. It's not one person, it's 4. 4 individuals that were doing everything they possibly could do to better their lives. They just went to bed one night, and some monster snuck into their home and killed them." His eyes staring into the camera were as dark as anvils. Gonzalez also spoke with CNN, reminding the world that he wanted the death penalty for Bryan Kohberger. He hoped that would send a message to potential murderers in the state of Idaho. "Unfortunately, a lot of bad things happen across America," Gonzalez said. "But we moved here, and other people moved here for the safety that we have. We have to make sure that the world knows that you can't come to Idaho, you can't hunt our children down, and you can't kill them in their beds and just be given, a room to stay. Koberger's silence when it came to entering his plea had surely irked the families of the victims. By all appearances, they believed in his guilt. None had come out to say otherwise, and now, with a seeming mountain of at least circumstantial evidence and the reported DNA match, Brian Koberger's only response had been the absence of one. He had nodded his head, he had clenched his jaw, he had said yes to the judge, but to the charges against him, only silence echoed. For 6 months now, there had been other silences, ones that were understandable, even reverent. Beyond the yellow crime scene tape with the words "Do Not Cross" draping the perimeter of the property at King Road, strangers continued to come by the hundreds to quietly pay their respects. Some had out-of-state license plates on their vehicles, having journeyed from afar. Others were U of I students, traipsing up the hill with their backpacks cinched tight. They stared, said nothing, sometimes dropped flowers at the makeshift memorial that had sprung up in front of the house. At the U of I vigil on campus, there was that silent sea of faces staring up at Ben Mogan while he spoke about his Maddie. His hands had nervously jiggled in the pockets of his suit that seemed uncomfortable against his skin. There were silences as he paused to catch his breath. Maddie's mother and stepfather, Karen and Scott Laramie, had walked silently into the hole in their lives left by their daughter's absence. They made fewer and fewer public statements, seemingly adrift in their pain. Jeff Kernodle had stopped answering his phone. It had been ringing with media requests for him to talk about Xana, and it hadn't gone silent. Only Jeff had. The ache of losing his daughter may be too strong to put into words. It was a silence he had earned. Xana's mother, of course, must have been enduring the silence that came with knowing how much she had missed, those hours that don't come back. And in the sunrise that Jim and Stacy Chapin watched some mornings together with their coffees, there were likely yellow and white streaks across the sky that reminded them of their boy. The air came all the way across a field to touch them, as if carrying Ethan on its wings. In those small moments of silence, where life was remembered as precious, there may have been hope. That's the ending of episode 15 of While Idaho Slept. If you're enjoying this bedtime book series so far, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for being here. I truly appreciate all your support in this series, crying me to sleep. Until next time, good night.